See, this is a really stunning turn of events because you have this man at this point. He's 30 years old when he comes face to face with Pharaoh, but has spent well over a decade in suffering because it was as a teenager that his brothers sell him into slavery. Losing his father, his younger brother. By the way, did I mention that when his younger brother was born, his mother died in childbirth? I mean, everything has been stripped away from this guy. And one unjust event after another takes place to where he ends up in prison for well over 2 years for saying no to a woman that he shouldn't have been with. Forgotten by the one that walked out of the door saying he would remember him. And then here's this powerful story of redemption where God draws him straight out of that pit and to basically the highest position in Egypt. Second, right under Pharaoh himself. I wonder, what would have happened if Joseph had gotten out when he wanted to? What would have happened to Joseph if he had not been sold into slavery in the first place? What would have happened to his whole family? Suddenly, Joseph finds himself drawn straight out of the pit to this high position, ruling over all of Egypt, in charge of drawing in the grain during the years of abundance, over everything except Pharaoh himself. Powerful story of redemption, yet it doesn't end there. We keep reading. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took a signet ring from his finger, put it on Joseph's finger, dressed him in robes of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and men shouted before Joseph, make way, make way. Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift hand or foot in all Egypt. So Pharaoh gave him a new name, gave him the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, to be his wife, and Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And he went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sands of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping record because it was beyond measure. This is a great part. Before the years of famine came, so still during the abundance, 2 sons were born to Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, and listen to what he says. It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. Can you imagine the redemptive work that God has done inside of him to the point that he would be able to forget the pain and the loss of his family? I mean, have you experienced that kind of inner healing? So much so that at the point of when Manasseh is born, he's able to say, it's because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. Then the second son he named Ephraim, and he says this, it's because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. Not only has God redeemed him from the pain and loss of his family. But then in the midst of this desert of suffering, there is this fruit bearing that is taking place in Joseph's life. Way beyond just barely making it, but there's this abundance factor happening. Two amazing declarations of Joseph's heart in this little part right here, happening during the abundance. Then, verse 53, the 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said they would. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. So he told the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph, do what he tells you." When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the countries came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all the world. Not only are we seeing an amazing story of redemption taking place, God pulling Joseph out, pulling him and putting him in this high place, redeeming all of the stuff, all of that bad stuff that had happened to him, bringing redemption there. Not only does he do that, but then he brings a rescue for the world through it. The famine was severe throughout the world, it says. But because of the preparation that Joseph had put in place there in Egypt, now there is a world coming to Joseph's feet, being rescued. And there's a lost and dying world. There's a world out there that is starving because of the spiritual famine that is taking place. Not only does God want to bring a redeeming grace in our lives to pull us up out of the pit, but He wants to use that to rescue that starving world. But the story doesn't end. It doesn't end there. And I can't keep reading because it would cover the next 3 to 4 chapters to tell you that the next phase is probably the most powerful phase, because when the famine hits, it hits Joseph's family. And they hear about the fact that Egypt has grain that they can go buy. And so there is this story that unfolds where Joseph's family shows up at his feet, and guess what they do? They bow down. They don't know it's Joseph because he's all Egypted up. Can I use that word? They don't recognize him. He recognizes them immediately, his brothers. But they don't know that it's Joseph. But sure enough, just as that dream he had when he was a teenager, still at home, of his family bowing down before him, suddenly becomes true. I mean, we're talking about well over a decade later does this vision become fulfilled. And over the next 3 chapters, you see Joseph restored with his family. Man, I mean, think about it. Our God is in the business of redeeming us out of the pit, using that to rescue a lost and dying world, and then He will go so far as to restore what has been stolen from us. Restore what the enemy wanted to take away, what the enemy tried to rob us of. He is in the business of bringing restoration to that. This is the God that we worship. He's the same. He's the same today as He was in this story. He's the same. The enemy longs to kill, steal, and destroy. But our God is victorious over that and wants to take what the enemy meant for harm and use it for his good. And there is no more significant story to look at than what we see in Joseph. His family rescued from certain death of starvation because of his journey as a slave and as a prisoner. What if Joseph had been delivered when he wanted it? And Pharaoh has those dreams, and there's no Joseph to bring interpretation, which then allows Egypt to be prepared for the 7 bad years. You see, you and I are crammed into a box of time where all we can see is what's happening right in front of our faces. And when what's happening right in front of our faces is darkness, and it's hard, and it's suffering, and it's stuff that is even put on to us by other people, and we beg God for deliverance from that. This is unfair, God, deliver me from this. Make this go away. Make them go away. Whatever the prayer might be. And he's saying, you know what, son, daughter, I'm not crammed into that same box of time that you are. I'm Lord over time. I've got a big picture. I understand what you're going through. I see it and I'm with you. My hand is upon you, but understand that my timing is perfect, and you have to let me unfold my plan even in the midst of this hardship. Boy, I tell you, if this sermon is not for anybody else today, it's for me. Our God is a redeeming God. He's a rescuing God. He's a restoring God. I don't know where you might find yourself in this story today. What your needs might be, and you might need all of it. Understand that He is the same today as He was then. He has in mind what He wants to do, and He wants to be at work accomplishing these things in your life. Sarah's going to come up, and we're going to close by just worshiping through in our response today. You may just want to stay there and take in what God has been saying and let Him work in your heart as He wants to do right there in your chair. Altars are open. There'll be some that may want to move forward in prayer. Maybe you want to be alone in prayer. Maybe you want to pray as a family. And I can't begin to know what it is that the Lord is saying to your hearts, but I believe He's speaking. Respond. Lord, these are your words for us today. And there are some that need to be redeemed. There are some that need to be rescued. There are some that need to be experiencing some sort of restoring factor in their relationships. And there's some that all three of these are where they are at. And I'm asking that you just do your thing. As we respond to you, do your thing. Just you and Jesus time.
Dear refuge of my weary soul, on thee when sorrows rise, on thee when waves of trouble rolls, my fainting hope relies. To thee I tell each rise.